So the first talk is going to be the session was envisaged because everybody wants to know how to deal with the complications in the various surgeries. So we'll be going right from anterior segment to posterior segment surgery. It's like a pan-ophthalmology session. So I would first like to request Dr. Gaurav Luthra to give his talk. Gaurav?
Yes, thank you, Namrata. Thank you for accommodating me, and thank you for inviting me as well for this interesting session. It's always a pleasure to speak on these complications. So I was going to talk on OOPS in ICL surgery, and good to see Ashwin here as well. Hello, Ashwin. Good morning. So OOPS in ICLs, and let's see what all can go wrong and how we can deal with them. So this is a very old video, 2005 or 6, and that's when we used to, you can see me holding the globe with a forceps, which is anathema today. And this is when it must be amongst the first few surgeries that I was doing with the ICL. And you can see that because I'm not putting counter pressure, I'm not using the ICL manipulator to stabilize the globe, I've ended up with this funny situation. And of course, if you attempt to do a wound assisted injection, unlike IOLs here, you will always end up in a soup. So see, I'm having to enlarge my incision. And now I've learned with my mistake, I'm now stabilizing the globe with a globe stabilizer, enough viscoelastic, and the cartridge tip to be inside the incision, or at least to the innermost lip. And then you do a controlled counter traction with your manipulator, and then only you can get the ICL in. So this is also how you would put your IOLs, but in ICLs, it's very important not to do a wound assisted injection. You will get a stuck ICL like this. So here, if you'll notice that here again, no point showing you how to load it because this was a time again 2006 or 7. Now I'm injecting the lens. I'm doing everything right, it seems. I'm using counter forces and my cartridge tip is right at the tip. But as I watch how the ICL is unfolding, sometimes you take your view away from the incision and from how well you're putting counter traction. And if you stop for a moment, you can see what's happened. The cartridge tip, when I started off, it was right there. And now it has slipped back because the counter pressure was not good enough. And as I observed how the ICL was unfolding, my cartridge tip is now outside the wound. Now this you should never allow to happen because now you'll have to deal with this ICL, which you can't push through, obviously. So how to deal with a stuck ICL? Today, I would just pull it out. You don't want to touch anywhere in the optical area. I'm trying to see how I can do it. Again, these are 15 years old videos just to teach you. And now I'm with this ICL, which is stuck. Let's see what I do. I'm going to play around with the forceps. At that time, it was still early days and nobody had told us that you can just pull it out with an ICL forceps very easily. I somehow managed to push it through and it twists, and this way you can damage an ICL really hard. I mean, you can damage the optic and everything, but this was what I understood at that time. These were the first 5 or 6 cases that I was doing. So anyway, I managed to do that, but today, how would I do it? First thing is that loading the ICL is very important so that you don't get a funny situation. Make sure that the 3 holes are aligned, pull it in straight, and watch it under the microscope that the 3 holes are all in one line. That way you're sure that at least the loading is good. It can still twist inside, and while you're injecting, you can still see whether those holes are right. So here, as I was injecting, the ICL got stuck. Now, this happens very rarely, but if it does happen, let me just mute this for a moment. If it still happens, you just have to hold it with the ICL forceps and come out, reload it, and then just go back and inject. So, even if part of your ICL is outside and much of it is inside, you can just hold the ICL by its ear and pull it out and re-inject. So that makes life very easy. Now, another complication that you can have is that while you're injecting, sometimes the ICL will start rotating. Even though we've loaded it right, you can see the 3 holes in one line. And again, this is a relatively old video, but as I was injecting, I realized, just watch what I'm doing. As I'm injecting, the ICL seems to be coming out in a peculiar way. So I'm going to rotate, just watch this, the injector, and see how I rotate it. As I'm injecting, I notice, so I immediately rotate it. Now this may or may not work always, because sometimes you'll just realize, just whether like with an IOL, a 3-piece IOL, you'll sometimes try to rotate it if it's coming out in the wrong orientation. Here I succeeded and it went off well. Sometimes it does not. And sometimes you have to then go back. So another situation that can happen, because these wounds are a little bigger and you can, sometimes have ICL manipulations through the wound. If it's stuck or something, you'll have a leaky wound. So unlike cataract wounds, you can check these wounds by just putting a drop of trypan blue. If it leaks, you don't want to suture it. It's a toric ICL. You don't want to induce astigmatism. So I'll just do a supraincisional tunnel. You can see how I'm doing it. I'm hardening the globe with infusion from my left hand, making a supraincisional pocket and hydrating it, just like a Wong incision, and see how how fast it seals. You don't need to do any suturing or anything. This is rarely required, but when it is, it becomes very useful. Sometimes you'll have these peculiar ICLs which are decentered because they are wrong sized. You'll have a low vault. And then if you do an OCT and you find that there's peripheral touch, if there's a hole in the middle, like in the new designs, you may not do anything to it to watch it. But if it's an old ICL, older design, then you might want to exchange it. So I'll skip this video because we have better interesting ones. You might deal with a cataract in the past because there was no center of flow there. So this is a very old cataract. Now you rarely get cataracts, and if you do, then you can obviously manage them quite easily. They are not difficult to manage. Now this is the complication which ended up with me, one referred by a colleague. One eye was perfectly done. Second eye, somehow, I did the OCT and I was amazed to see this. It's an upside down ICL. It's an inverted IPCL or ICL. And obviously this will lead to a cataract. I told the patient to go back, get operated. He went back, the surgeon removed the IPCL. But this is what the cataract was left behind. So the patient came back to me, we operated it and were able to manage it. But this is a dreadful complication. On table, please ensure that this doesn't happen. And I'll try to show you how to find out if it is happening. This was... I injected this IPCL. Now, what you have to do is, before you start doing all these things, you should always check the box and the packing and see what is the correct orientation. Now, in an IPCL, these two holes in a smart toric IPCL kind of a thing, they have to be superior. So this IPCL flipped as I was injecting, and you can also see the holes on the ears of the haptics of the IPCL. So that tells you about the orientation. They have that small notch on it. So as I injected it, I realized that something was not right. I noticed these two holes. Now it was looking fine to me, so I thought that I'm going to put it in, but then when I saw those two holes inferiorly rather than superiorly, obviously the orientation is wrong. And believe me, even after 15-20 years of doing ICL, sometimes if it's an upside down ICL, you will not know it till you've done, like, at least two of the haptics have been put behind the iris, and then you realize that there is something different to the field. So please watch out for all the markings, and if you notice that, then you can obviously have to explant the ICL. Don't flip it inside. It comes out very easily like that through a 3mm incision. Reload it and then just inject it just the way you would, and make sure that the loading is good. And then watch out for so you can see that on the leading haptic and the trailing haptic, the one which has the small notch on it is on that side, and on the trailing it's on the opposite. So you can see the small notch there, and the two holes are now superiorly. So this is how you can be sure that they are in the right place. Now, this was one patient I was going to operate, and as I sat down to operate, the moment I switched on the light, the pupil constricted like this. They had probably been dilating the patient since the morning, and when the patient came for surgery in the afternoon, I had this patient. I could have abandoned the surgery. I decided to go through with it. So if you have an intraoperative meiosis while you started the IPCL or halfway through, or even when you're going to start it, you can actually manage it quite well. We put phenocaine here, and you can see how well the pupil dilates fairly fast. I've done studies with phenocaine, so this was one of the studies where we used it for IPCL, for ICL injection. And you can now, obviously, it's a simple way to do it. I'll come to the last case that I want to show you today. And this is a 25-year-old male who was operated by us for both eyes. First eye was totally uneventful, the right eye, and then the left eye was done a few days later. And it was under topical anesthesia, and this is how post-op day 1 the patient presented. He was operated in the previous evening. First eye had gone off totally clear. Second eye, he complained in the morning when he reported that he was from an adjoining city, so he could not come at night. He had been throwing up all through the night. We typically, with viscoelastic, if it is used during surgery, even though it's washed out thoroughly, we give Dimox. And patient probably had very raised IOPs late night and came up with this situation. And it was almost like an RBH, a retrobulbar hemorrhage. The vision was fairly good, like 6/9, but he had been vomiting through the night. And on OCT, the vault was good. And post-op day 1, we gave mannitol and Dimox and tried to bring the IOP down. The AC was burped. Post-op day 2, his vision fell. So we had to intervene. We went in and did a small wash and tried to see if there was any ICL tuck. And we just repositioned the ICL. Post-op, his eye pressure started getting a little better. We thought it was Urey-Zavalia syndrome. So please be careful. I've stopped using viscoelastic completely now for the last few years. And I do a hydroimplantation. And I won't show you the video because we are out of time, I think. Namrata, do you have 30 seconds to show hydroimplantation? Or I didn't hear the buzzer, so I don't know.
1 minute and 31 seconds.
Left? Okay, so then I have time. Let me show this then. Okay, this is how I do my ICLs now. Namrata, the timer is visible to all the other speakers and panelists except the speaker himself. So something has to be done in the system that the speaker can see the time as well. Anyway, so routine surgery, you can just make the side port incisions. as you would. And frankly, I don't use these blades anymore. These side blades, I mean, they are angled, but they are very long. I've started using a newer blade from Money, which is my favorite blade. It's known as a 21 gauge side port blade, which is not so long, and it's very nice. It's angled also, and many other manufacturers are making it. But now here I'm using the infusion from the side port, and I'm going to do an injection. There is no viscoelastic used at any point here. Now, this you should attempt only after you've done a few hundred ICLs, because you cannot inject ICLs into a chamber without viscoelastic unless you are highly skilled, and still there is room for error. Even if you are highly skilled, you can still have a problem. If you have an aborted injection or something, you can have a very shallow AC, you can have a lens touch. So you have to be very, very careful and be prepared for all eventualities. But this has helped us a lot. You do hydroimplantation. These patients post-op do extremely well. There are no IOP spikes. There are no inflammation. These patients, the vault remains very steady. Whatever you have immediate post-op is what it remains. So in many ways, we found that the hydroimplantation works very well. But a word of caution, it is risky to inject ICLs and manipulate them inside the chamber when you don't have viscoelastic inside. So I would suggest that use this with extreme caution only if you are very confident about your surgical technique, but it gives you excellent results. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gaurav. I think that was a complete atlas of complications in ICL surgery. Not that, not that you do so many, but the fact that you manage so many when they happen and if they happen. So thank you very much for your talk. We will now go to the next talk, and the next talk is going to be on OOPS in cataract surgery. So Dr. Ashwin is going to speak on OOPS.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Namrata. Thank you so much for having me. This is a very, very special topic because OOPS in ophthalmology, I think, has roots in everybody's surgical journey. And I think everybody is going to have some OOPS or something somewhere. I'm going to show you some of my OOPS, and I hope everybody can see my screen.
Yes.
I don't have
yeah. You can see.
I don't have any financial interest in my topic today, but I will begin with something that I had coined the term VAP. VAP is vitrectomy assisted phacoemulsification, and this is a procedure done in aqueous misdirection, coloboma, wherever there is positive pressure coming from behind. And I'll tell you the technique is basically to do a little bit of dry vitrectomy to free up some space in the anterior chamber. That was the technique that was this thing. But here I'm showing you something that did not happen as per plan. So once I'm doing my rhexis, I'm doing my hydrodissection over here. I have done my hydrodissection and I've started my phaco, but as soon as I am close to completion of my phacoemulsification, I noticed that this bag had the anterior capsule rim has actually ripped all the way to the periphery, but it's not gone behind. And once I'm doing my trocar to do my VAP, that is vitrectomy assisted phaco, this is my intermittent vitrectomy where I'm doing 1,000 cut rate for about 4-5 seconds. I'm now doing my irrigation aspiration. Everything looks hunky-dory. Everything looks good. I've got a good bag, except for this inferior little bit of a rip. If you watch here in this quadrant, I've got a rip, but it's not gone to the periphery. So I'm okay. And I'm continuing my procedure here, thinking that, you know what, I'm going to be able to put this lens in place. And things don't go as per plan sometimes. And the oops moment is right about now when I'm trying to dial this lens or drop this haptic in place. But then I suddenly realized, oh boy, something's not right. That rip, which was inferior, I've actually managed to push it so far beyond that now vitreous has started to prolapse into the anterior chamber and more into my wound. So now I have to think of what to do now. And I'm now thinking of my plan B. So I've taken off my iris hooks. I take the iris hook tire and place it into the haptic. So my IOL now does not drop down. Now what I do is basically make my partial thickness flaps because now there's no sulcus. I need to make my secondary IOL implantation. So I'm making my partial thickness flap. I'm showing you a way of switching from plan A to plan B and yet getting great results in these cases. So basically doing a bimanual technique, I'm now externalizing the first leading haptic and externalizing my trailing haptic. Once both are externalized, I remove my iris hooks. And once these two are removed, I'm tucking my haptics into the Gebel Chariot's tunnel. on both ends. And now my IOL is pretty well centered, but my pupil is not. So I'm trying to now renegotiate that pupil or reconstruct that pupil to make it more round, make it more robust, and block off all the rays that could affect an abrasion due to the light rays of that defect. And end of it, this is how it looks post-operatively, first day post-op. I also wanted to show you another case, which is this. Yeah, I still don't have any financial interest. I'm going to take you. So here's a case of another vitrectomy assisted phaco, but here's a very hard, dense nucleus and a larger coloboma. If you have a look at it, I would rather refrain from doing any trypan blue or blue Rex in this case, but the idea is to basically use iris hooks, visualize your rexus, make sure that your rexus is large enough so that the nucleus can come out. Once your nucleus, once your rexus is large enough, I'm doing a vitrectomy assisted phaco again. And this time around, I'm now doing some hydrodissection. Remember guys, this is a very hard nucleus. So I'm now trying to chop this nucleus somewhere in the back, but I know that this is not an ideal situation. And I started to see something I was not so happy about. This nucleus is trying to find its way in between that gap and trying to find its way down south, which was not very pleasant to watch, to be honest. So now I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to remove my iris hooks. I'm going to place this nucleus into the anterior chamber and then try and emulsify it. It's not a very pretty sight to watch, especially such a hard brunescent cataract, but it still didn't listen to me. The minute I pushed in the saline, it was trying to find its way down south. And it's not a pleasant sight in these scenarios. My plan B, to go to plan B, was to switch over to a small incision and actually do a glued intraocular lens in this case. But basically, all in all, this was not a pleasant scenario, but I did learn something out of this plan B, that how can I prevent from moving a hard brunescent cataract. I could do an SICS in this case and get away with it, and that's okay. But could I do it in any other way where I retain the bag and keep that bag complex well enough? In this case, I couldn't because of the bag not being stable enough, thanks to my too much maneuvering in that scenario. But what I'm also showing here is basically how do you switch over from plan A to plan B. I'm going to show another case immediately post. I got this case about a month or so out, and it looked exactly the same. And that's why I wanted to show both these cases, and something that I learned in my previous scenario of how do you prevent this problem from happening. So the first thing I do is place my iris hooks, do my rexus, and I'll show you another trick which I think is important to understand. I did not make a large enough rexus. So whenever you do that, please take it with a pinch of salt that you need to expand that rexus. And so I am enlarging that rexus out larger. Now I'm placing capsular hook. Now this capsular hook does two things. One is it stabilizes the bag, and it also prevents my nucleus now from going into that space. That space, the coloboma space, it will prevent me from going into that direction, prevent this nucleus from moving in that direction. And that's something that I really learned and took home from that previous case. And now in any case where I have more than 4 clock hours, remember guys, 4 clock hours of coloboma, I will always place a capsular hook in place so that prevents my issues from escalating. And now I'm placing, and another small tip or trick over here is don't you have to watch the end of that capsule tension ring going in, because if it doesn't, this is what will happen. You need to ensure that it goes in. You need to make sure that that rexus is round. Lots of small learning points in this video, which honestly I couldn't talk about, but I have tried to address all the small points which you really go on to make this a beautiful learning video. And at the end of it, did remove all my cortical matter from here. And now I'm doing my single pass 4-throw pupilloplasty in this case. to close that pupil and make it round enough and ensure that this patient gets absolutely great visual results as well as iris defect closure. Probably in hindsight, I might have done another pupilloplasty to close that gaping wound in the inferior quadrant, but this was one of the first few cases way back in the day. Thank you very much. I don't have any financial interest in my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashwin. I think those were beautiful sets of, videos on your OOPS on cataract surgery and wonderful management of, colobomatous eyes and all the complications that were seen. Can we have the next talk, please? The next talk is going to be by Dr. Mohan Rajan, and he's going to be showing his videos on OOPS in IOL implants.
Can I share my screen, Namrata?
Yeah. Dr. Sonu, are you there? Sonu Goyal? I thought, yes.
Are you able to see my screen?
Namrata, when is my sequence?
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir. Able to see your
Okay.
screen.
Okay. Let me thank Namrata for the wonderful opportunity. I think it's a very good session because OOPS is something which everybody has to look for when you are, because it can catch you completely, totally unaware of the whole thing. You can see, I'm going to talk to you about the OOPS in IOL implantation. And you can see here, this patient has got a Crysta lens in 2009, came all the way from Coimbatore. At that time, I was the highest number of Crysta lens implantation I did. You can see the Crysta lens broke. You can see this, only the Crysta went inside, the lens was outside. You can see that completely broke. And this you have to be very, very careful. The lens fractures are not uncommon, especially with the silicone lenses, the Crysta lenses, silicone lens for the matter. You can see this patient, you can see the lens has gone through the, because the shooters, you have to be very careful with the shooters. I'll show this video again. You can see this shooters, when you do the shooters, what will happen is when you do the push tape technique, there's a possibility of the lens rupturing the PC and going into the vitreous cavity, and that's what has happened. You can see the lens dancing in the vitreous cavity as well. And these are preloaded lenses. You have to be very, very careful with these preloaded lenses. You can see this is a preloaded lenses. I will not mention the name of the company. And you can see there is a big hole right in the center of the thing. And whenever there is a very tight resistance of the injector, and this is, I think, one of the reasons why you should not inject at all. And this I have learned over a period of time. You can see, and when one of my postgraduates is asking, what is this hole in the center? I said it's a pinhole through which the patient can see better. Okay, and this is what you call I call it the donut IOL. And this is another patient, again, a preloaded lenses and made by the Zeiss company. You can see that it was an apparent surface optic, but only the optic was there, and the haptic came later. And you can see this both the optics were completely fractured, and only the optic was inside. And these are all things we have to be very careful. And I try to, obviously, we have to explant these lenses and put these lenses again. Again, it's the trifocal lenses, and you can see here, which is got a very tight injector. When you have resistance, as I told you, please don't inject, come out of this thing, probably reload the lenses. You can see this is the 3 zones of the trifocal lenses, the zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and all the 3 zones you can see beautifully, and the cracks you can see on the lenses. Obviously, these lenses we have to explant, and we have to cut these lenses and explant. These are this I call it the lockdown effect. You can see here, this lens was kept in the cold storage for a long time, and probably the viscoelastic also was used as a very cold storage, very cold, and you can see the lens is completely white because of the dense deposits of the viscoelastic on the lens as well as on the surface of this thing. Again, you can see this aniridial lens. Okay, this aniridial lens actually it went for suturing, but if you want to do it a glued, this I'm trying to do a glued IOL in this aniridial lens. You can see here I'm trying to pull it. The haptics are a little fragile in aniridial lenses, and this is what we have to be aware of that, and probably take precautions and handle these haptics because aniridia lens is very difficult to get. Fortunately, we had another aniridia lens backup in this particular patient, and we were able to do it. Again, the lens, the kissing haptics is not uncommon, and especially with Acrisoft and the Technis lenses. And the kissing haptics sometimes takes a longer time. This probably took about 5 minutes for me, and I was completely using. Sometimes you might have to use a 2-second instruments to open it up, and use some viscoelastic as well, and probably do a lot of irrigation. I can see there's a phaco tip which has been used for a long time. The phaco tip detached and was lying in the anterior chamber, and you can see this the tip detachment, and this is also a very rare scenario. This is another, again, a patient with the preloaded lenses. You can see the optic is actually on the posterior, stuck to the posterior surface of the optic, the haptic. And this is one of the main problems, and very difficult to solve also, because it's very difficult to go underneath the optic and try to release the haptic. And this is what will happen. And sometimes it takes a long time, and you have to do a lot of maneuvers and acrobatics in the anterior chamber to bring it up. And fortunately for me, the haptic got released, and the patient did very well. Again, you can see the second instrument which got detached, and you can see it's lying there. And this is again something which you have to, we have to be very careful. Again, the wound assisted technique of implantation of lenses, you have to be very careful, because if you don't inflate the chamber, then the anterior chamber, it can buckle. And if you don't push it enough, what will happen is the lens will get stuck like this. The lens gets stuck like this. This lens got stuck like this. This is an MI60 lens, and it was a hyperopic lens, about 30 diopter, very thick lens as well. So what it is not going inside, it's not coming out. So I put another incision, put a lens inside the eye, and remove this lens. Actually, if you have a stuck lens like this, always go posterior to the incision and try to open up the incision a little more and try to pull the lens out. And always examine the lens, because sometimes the lens can be damaged during the implantation. Probably replace the lens as well. Again, bimanual IA, you can see the bimanual IA completely detached and lying in the anterior chamber. You can see that the detachment of the bimanual IA, which is again seen. The sleeveless, the phaco, you can see the sleeve got cut here and got attached here, and then got detached again outside the eye. And these are some of the oops. Again, I told you I already shown you this, wherein the optic comes first, the haptic comes later in this particular preloaded lenses. The preloaded lenses, we have to be very careful now. All the companies are coming out of the preloaded lenses. The diamond knife, you can see the diamond knife going inside, and then when it came out, it got detached completely from the hub of this thing. And you can see here, there's a diamond knife, and next day it was in the Sujata's ear, it became the diamond wife. And you can see here the MST forceps, which is used again for the glued IOL. And this particular this thing, when aniridia lenses with the PK, I did. And you can see this, the MST forceps also got detached and lying down. Fortunately for me, it was lying down on the angle, and I was able to take it off without any problem. Sometimes it can go inside and produce an intraocular foreign body. This is a haptic. You can see this is a haptic which is got stuck. This is an Envista lenses. You can see here. We tried to pull the haptic, because these are all the medicinal injectors. These medicinal injectors are very difficult. They are what we call as the green injectors. And sometimes when you try to pull the haptic, it gets completely fractured, and you have to probably remove the lens and extend the incision, pushing the lens. That's what happened in this particular case. But as you can see here, the chopper, the long chopper, you can see here very carefully. What is happening is, and the chopper got detached, and not only detached, it also got emulsified by the phacoemulsification. And this again, oops, this thing. Again, these Envista lenses, as you know, the Envista lenses take a very long time to unfold inside the eye. And this particular Envista lenses, you can see here, it is lying down in the anterior chamber. A lot of acrobatics was done. 3 minutes has gone by, 5 minutes has gone by, 8 minutes has gone by. I tried to unfold the lens, but the lens was not unfolding. And obviously, I had to explant this lens and replace this with another lens for the matter. Again, the plunger, again is another patient with the preloaded lenses. Again, you can see here the plunger, the silicone plunger sometimes can get detached along with the lenses as well. And it's very difficult to remove the silicone plunger because these silicone lenses, these plungers are very slippery as well. And you can see here I'm trying to remove it because it's not holding with the forceps, but I had great difficulty in removing it. And this also we have to keep in mind. This is another patient wherein it's a preloaded lenses. One lens came and then, oops, we saw the just wait for some time, you'll know what is happening here. You can see there's another lens also coming out into the same eye. And this patient I wanted actually bilateral simultaneous cataract surgery, but both the lenses were in the same eye. And you can see here, this is haptic, as I told you, the haptic attachment. And this the green injectors, you have to be very careful. Sometimes the haptic can get caught in the injector. So what I do normally is to do what is called the ocular episotomy. And you can see here, I'm putting a 11 blade. When you create a space between the cartridge and the silicone, the silicone tire there, and the cartridge and the silicone tire, then you'll be able to release that haptic without any problem, without fracturing or deforming the lenses as well, deforming the optic. And this is what happened. This is an in-focus lens. I was able to put the in-focus lens without any problem at all. And finally, last but not the least, all of a sudden you can see that the silicone handle from the microscope falling on the eye after a lucentis injection, and this can also happen as a oops. Thank you very much, Namrata, for the wonderful this thing. These are all things which we are recorded. So the take-home message is that please record each and every case because you do not know when your oops is coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohan Rajan. That's a treasure of videos which you only have and nobody else has. And it's so beautifully showed that, what can go wrong and how you will be able to manage it. I think that's a complete atlas of problems that can occur with the IOLs. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Namrata.
Thank you. I would now request Dr. Tanuj Dada, who's a professor at RP Center, to present his oops in glaucoma surgery.
Thank you, Dr. Namrata. Can you hear me and see my slides?
Yeah.
So I think glaucoma surgery is very different because it is mostly oops. And if you don't get oops intraoperatively, then it's post-operative oops. And so the first dreaded nightmare is that you have started surgery and you are using a corneal traction suture. So this is a patient of primary congenital glaucoma. So now you see the corneal traction suture has been put and there's a corneal perforation. Now this is a disaster because you have a flat AC in a child's eye and you have lost the AC. And how do you make now an entry and put viscoelastic because there is no side port? So in this situation, we use the track of the perforation only to just form the AC, then make a side port. And now you have to make an inferior traction suture and you have to put an air bubble. The problem now is that the eye has become hypotenuse, but with the air bubble and the inferior traction suture, you can go ahead and complete your surgery. This is a trabeculotomy combined with a trabeculectomy. And you can see that the air bubble has to be maintained throughout the surgery. So important take home message is that when you're going to pass this suture, because a child's eye, the cornea is very thin, you have to be very careful. And if you perforate, don't try to redo this suture, put in an air bubble through that same track. Sometimes you may have to suture and always then put an inferior traction suture. There should be no traction on the area which you have perforated, and the seal must be checked at the end of surgery. Now the next complication that we can face, this is again a patient where we're operating. This is a patient, we are doing a trabeculotomy combined with a trabeculectomy. So after the mitomycin C application, you do a routine surgery, you raise a laminar skittle flap, and then you raise a second deeper flap that is for your trabeculotomy. You de-roof the Schlemm's canal, and then you're going to insert your Harm's trabeculotome. So one side, very nice. Now, as soon as the other side is done, you just watch what is going to happen here. There is a gush of blood. So what has happened, there is an injury which is occur to the ciliary body. There is sudden rise in intraocular pressure, and you will watch here, your trabeculotomy incision has also gaped. So in this situation, you immediately have to put in an air bubble and wash the anterior chamber. Otherwise, your hyphema is going to organize. You make the ostium to decompress the eye. You have to again try to make the ostium and prolapse the uval tissue back, and then complete your surgery. So the important take-home message is that when you're doing a trabeculotomy, it is very essential that you lay slightly anterior towards the corneal side, because if you try and dip the trabeculotome, it can injure the ciliary body and you can get a massive hyphema, and you require immediate evacuation with air and your BSS. Now, the third very critical complication is the vitreous loss that can occur while you're making a trabeculectomy ostium. So this is a routine trabeculectomy surgery. You're making the ostium, and now you see as soon as the last thing is cut, you have this jelly coming. So there is a vitreous loss occurring. So two important caveats are, first thing is, whenever you are making the ostium, there should be no traction. So while making the ostium, the assistant is pulling on the cornea, so that is causing a counter traction. So never have any traction on when you are making the ostium. The second important thing is always try to go slightly anterior, because then you are going into the clear cornea. If you make a posterior opening, you will get vitreous loss. So once you get vitreous, you immediately have to stop the surgery. You have to now do a vitrectomy, otherwise your vitreous is going to block the ostium. So you have to always, you should keep a vitrectomy ready even when you're doing trabeculectomy surgery, and especially for children, because there the eyeball is stretched. So now you see the vitrectomy has been done with the AC maintainer on. So the entire vitreous has to be cleared from this area, and then you form the anterior chamber with air, and with triamcinolone you can check if there is any vitreous in the ostium. And because you already made the ostium, now you can close the wound and you can proceed with regular surgery, and always check that there is no vitreous bead at the area of the ostium. Now, the other important thing is that you have done a surgery and post-operatively you have a shallow AC. And this is a patient referred to us early post-operative period. There was a conjunctival wound leak and a shallow AC. So multiple conjunctival sutures have been put, and you can see there is a positive Seidel test here. So that means there is some problem underneath the conjunctiva. So in this situation, you should not try to do direct suturing. You have to open up the complete conjunctiva and do an exploration of what is going wrong. So the entire area has to be dissected. And once it is dissected, you can see there is a small area where there is active gush of aqueous. So simple conjunctival suturing was not successful. So in that situation, you have to plug this defect. So there are three options. One is sclera, one is Momini's repair. But if the defect is very small, you can also use a biodegradable collagen implant. In this situation, it will both help to tamponade this small area of leakage, and additionally, it may prevent some fibroblast proliferation, because now this surgery is doomed to failure because there's already a lot of scarring and there is a defect. So you can't use antifibrotics such as mitomycin C. So in this situation, we adopted a different approach, and we used a biodegradable collagen implant to tamponade the area of the leakage and then overlay it with healthy conjunctiva. Suturing of the implant is warranted so that it doesn't move back and expose the area of the leakage. Now, this is a situation you have done the surgery, and first post-op day, you find AC is extremely shallow, but there is no active wound leak. So here, what is happening is there is an excessive leakage from the scleral flap. Now, this is a simple technique of transconjunctival suturing. You just apply multiple sutures from the conjunctiva to the scleral bed, back to the conjunctiva without opening the conjunctival incision. So that leads to closure of the scleral cleft and reversal of hypotony. So this is a transconjunctival suturing if you have an early post-operative hypotony following trabeculectomy where there is no active wound leak, and you can see this is despite a releasable suture that has been placed. The next situation, of course, is the most dreaded complication, and there we are helped by our retina colleagues. So this is a expulsive hemorrhage that has occurred, and you have to be very careful. It is best that you refer these cases to retina colleagues. So he has put in an AC maintainer, and now you can see he's making a partial thickness scleral incision and gradually deepening it till you hit the suprachoroidal fluid. Now you see the fluid is draining, and you have to press on both sides. Of course, you have localized on the ultrasound, and when you press on both sides, you will see a massive outpouring of the hemorrhage. So this is a site-saving procedure. The expulsive hemorrhage occurring due to hypotony after glaucoma filtering surgery, and the sclerotomy to decompress the eye and remove the expulsive hemorrhage. And when you've done a good surgery and the patient comes back to you with a hypotony maculopathy, so this was a young lady, and you can see very nice surgery done, but patient came back with a hypotony maculopathy, and this is a very common complication that you face in especially young patients post-operatively. So this will be my last video. So there are two problems here: a dysfunctional conjunctiva, young lady. So, and the second important thing is that there is also a defect in the sclera. So here, what we're using is a technique called Momini's repair. You are raising a laminar scleral flap and deflecting it anteriorly. And secondly, how to cover this conjunctiva? You make a pedicle flap from the side and overlay this area with a healthy conjunctiva. So two important principles. One is closure of the ostium with a laminar scleral flap rotated anteriorly. This is Momini's repair. And closure of the conjunctival defect with a pedicle conjunctival flap from the side to overlay with healthy conjunctiva. So these are few oops I wanted to cover in trabeculectomy surgery. I think I'll be just running out of time, so I will stop here. So thank you, Dr. Namrata, for this kind invitation.
Thank you, Tanuj. I mean, it was such a spectacular video because we don't see so many problems of TRAB, and each of them managed so well. Fantastic video, Tanuj, as usual.
Thank you.
So, Sonu, do you have to say something?
A wonderful presentation, and I think this whole program has been so very wonderfully designed and presented. Hats off. And
so thank you, Tanuj. I now would request Dr. Sonu Goyal to give his talk on my oops in the smile surgery.
So I think Ashwin designing these oops made me oop, huh? So thank you, Dr. Namrata ma'am, for giving me this opportunity. And I think it's been the best of the programs so far. And oops, we all know that the bubble sign is what gives me a help, yes, that the smile would end perfectly. But yes, sometimes these oops do occur, and for the paucity of time,
Sonu, is there an audio? We can't hear. Why are you playing?
Very small right incision. So let's watch. Here we present you the smile surgery. Is it audible, ma'am?
Yeah.
The patient is taken, and after docking, this is how the lenticle cut is being made, and then the side cut.
The video is not playing. Only the first black slider, this thing is coming.
This is done. Is it now? The side
No,
cut.
no, it is not playing. You will have to share and share again.
Dr. Sonu, are you playing on a Mac?
Yeah.
Or you just don't expand just don't make it full screen. It doesn't play if it's a video, right?
Oh. Yeah, I think now you can.
We can see it, but it's weird. Just,
is it okay now?
yeah, it's better now. Just play.
Is it?
Video is not playing. Yeah.
Is it playing now?
Yeah, it's playing now.
It's playing now,
Yeah, it's playing now, Doc.
but actually I don't have a cursor control now.
Yeah. This is really strange.
Give me a minute. I'll like the smile surgery on Visumax. The patient is taken, and after talking,
No,
this
it's
is how.
not playing, Sonu. It's not
Not
playing.
able to. Video is not playing. Why don't you turn off, turn on, and come back in while we'll do some questions over here.
Is it playing now?
Yeah, it is
Yeah,
playing
it's
now, but it is not full screen. You have, it is playing now. Can you make it?
I just wanted to avoid this.
Yeah.
Oh. So Ashwin, are you sure it will not play on the full screen mode?
It does actually play, but sometimes it gets stuck. So I'm just guessing that you might want to turn off your computer and turn it back on. We'll do some questions if you want for next 2, 4, 5 minutes if you want, till you
Or we
reorganize.
we have another presentation. We can probably take
Yeah,
that in.
go to the next presentation and come back.
So we have.
Is it visible now?
Yep, it's visible.
It is visible, but it is not full screen.
So I think you can take up the questions. Give me a minute then. I'll stop sharing and then I'll come back again.
So
I'm
think
sorry for that. Go
No,
for it.
it's okay. We'll wait. I'm sure it's a great presentation. I would now request Dr. Tarjini Dave to share her OOPS in oculoplasty.
Yeah, just give me a moment, ma'am. Just opening up the presentation. So at the outset, I'd like to thank the entire AIOC team and especially Dr. Namrata Sharma for having me present the OOPS in oculoplastic surgery. It's been a great session. I've learned a lot, even though I do not manage a lot of cataract surgery, but it's been really nice. Just one moment. Yeah. Are my slides visible?
No, I think you have to share your screen, Tarjini.
I am sharing my screen. Is it visible?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I'll go ahead with the OOPS in evisceration surgery. So for us, just like cataract forms the bread and butter for most ophthalmologists, for an oculoplastic surgeon, evisceration is one of the commonest surgeries that we perform. I'm Tarjini Dave. I come from LV Prasad Eye Institute, and I do not have any financial disclosures to make. So regarding the OOPS in our surgery, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about evisceration. What are the petal or the scleral flap techniques, the complications that are routinely seen, especially with a focus on implant migration extrusion. Also a little bit on how we augment volume when we feel that the orbit is not optimally augmented in terms of volume. Certain other complications that we see, such as cysts around the implant and eyelid malpositions, which are common, and just give you a sort of a brief on the management paradigm in these patients as a summarizing slide. And I'm going to do this with 10 case examples. So not everything is video based here, but you will be seeing a lot of video. So this is an ideal outcome of socket surgery for us, where you see this lady with a Thucycal eye who has a beautiful prosthetic eye placed with both the eyes looking fairly symmetric after the surgery. So this is what we call as ideal volume replacement. And how do we do that in evisceration? I just put up a collage instead of putting a video to sort of run you through the steps of evisceration surgery. Like nearly everybody would know, it begins with a peritomy, removing the corneal button, scooping out the contents of the eye. This is the important panel where we actually go ahead and make flaps within the sclera. These are known as sclerotomies, and each of these flaps is suspended by the corresponding extraocular muscle. So it's not a free tissue, it's held in the orbit by the extraocular muscle. At the posterior end, these flaps are divided from the optic nerve, and then we place the implant and perform closure of these flaps, followed by the closure of the conjunctiva and the tenons and placement of a conformer at the end of the surgery. So when you look at complications in evisceration, what are these? You may see complications associated with either the porous implant or the non-porous implant, which tends to give you 70% of the volume once you've performed the surgery. And the remaining 30% of the volume lost by removal of the eye is given by the prosthetic eye. We'll mainly focus on the complications seen with non-porous implant because nearly 90% of ophthalmologists in our part of the world use non-porous implants. And these are mainly two complications. You see exposure, which eventually leads to extrusion of the implant, which means it comes out. And the second one is implant migration. In essence, this is just one series that we published, which told us that migration is not very common, but nonetheless, we went ahead and defined migration. So what is implant migration? When you see that the implant that you have placed is not central within the intracorneal cavity and has gone inferotemporally, that is what is termed as implant migration. And as you can see in this gentleman, the prosthetic eye is actually resting on the lower eyelid and not in the inferior cul-de-sac as it should normally do. So what was being done for implant migration all these years was to perform implant exchange. But we now know that even if you exchange the implant, no matter how many number of times you do it, the implant tends to migrate again into the quadrant where it initially had migrated. So what are the other options? You can either remove the implant and perform a dermis fat graft, but this requires you to give another large incision at another site on the body, which many patients may not be ready for. So what did we do? So crystal gazing into the future, we thought, could we manage this in an innovative way? And that's where we brought about 3D printing to generate customized implants. So this is a patient who's had 2 implant exchanges. Despite that, the implant has migrated again into the quadrant where it was originally. And then we put a customized implant there, which was fabricated via 3D printing, and that pushes the implant central. So what does it achieve? It helps you retain a prosthesis in the orbit and sort of corrects the implant migration. And how is this done? So essentially, we take the patient's 3D, we take his 2D CT scan and convert it into a 3D model, as you're seeing over here, via readily available online software. And this 3D model is then sent to a printer, which actually prints the entire orbit in life size. Once you have this orbit printed, it sort of becomes pretty easy to play around with it. So this is one of the 3D printers which is available. Looks like a very fancy machine and is sort of, very exciting to see it do the entire process, which takes somewhere close to 8 to 10 hours to print one model of the orbit. And if you would see over here, you can see a sort of rough outline of the orbit that is there with support material. This, when put in a water bath, the support material dissolves and then gives you the life-size print of the orbit, on which you can play around and generate implants using the traditional implant generation skills that are there in any ocularistry laboratory. And when this implant is then placed in the orbit, it helps you correct the migration. So this is for people who might be more interested to read through the technique. Now, what is the other complication that you see? One of the common complications is exposure. As you're seeing over here, the implant was nearly exposed. In that situation, you need to go ahead, remove the implant, dissect the entire tissue, free the sclera from the optic nerve posteriorly, essentially create petals of the sclera, which will then allow you to place in a larger implant and close the defect. So these are the petals being made with the residual sclera. And if you see the inner surface of the sclera, it is covered with a lot of fibrous tissue, which requires to be peeled out. It is this fibrous tissue that keeps contracting and pushing the implant into exposure. So a very sort of, bloody surgery, messy surgery, time-consuming surgery. This was removal of the necrotic sclera. You see that implant which was placed inside secondarily. along with closure, you tend to retain as much tissue as you can. Even if the wound edges are ragged, they heal beautifully. Conserving tissue sort of becomes very important in this situation. And then when you might be left with a little bit of defect in the wound area, you can use a mucous membrane graft from the lip area to cover that defect and to give you the surface area that was lost. So this is the mucous membrane that has been transplanted into the socket. Typically, this is how implant extrusions are treated, and the outcomes are very gratifying. Now, few other oops in evisceration. One is when you have suboptimal volume augmentation. You see this lady who has sinking of the lower eyelid and this large sulcus deformity here, which can easily be corrected by placing a larger implant. So you exchange the one which was there inside for a much larger sized implant, and you see that her volume has built up. She has a little bit of ptosis, which can obviously be corrected later on. Certain other oops, there are some very finicky patients. This gentleman who has an excellent outcome but is worried about this deep superior sulcus following evisceration and little bit of enophthalmos, and is treated easily in the office by just a filler injection behind the eye. This is the point of entry of the filler. And just compare the sulcus here versus preoperatively, and you see that the sulcus has very beautifully built up. Similarly, a young girl who's worried about this sulcus deformity, in whose case we went ahead and injected some fat from the patient's abdomen to give her more permanent results. And in certain situations, you may not have any implant at all, just a plain evisceration is done. And there, where you build in the volume and build the surface with the help of an implant, you can see a reduction in the weight of the prosthesis, which sort of helps you bring the lower eyelid also back in position, because it's not bearing a very heavy prosthetic eye. Another patient with such lower eyelid retraction, which is simply corrected by placing an additional implant, such as a Porex wedge implant, into the orbit. Another situation that we also commonly see is protrusion of the prosthetic eye that can develop due to such cysts in the socket following surgery. And these can very easily be treated by just aspirating the fluid within the cyst and injecting a sclerosant into it, making it a 2-minute office procedure rather than undergoing a large surgical procedure. Probably the last slide that I have, last series of cases where you also see eyelid abnormalities in patients who undergo evisceration like this, where you're seeing a frank entropion. And in these situations, we go ahead and along with the evisceration also sort of perform a hard palate mucosal graft. This is the hard palate graft being harvested from the mouth of the patient, from the region of the hard palate, which is then transplanted into the eyelid to act as a spacer graft. And this allows correction of entropion in the same sitting, giving very gratifying outcomes post-operatively. So that's the placement of the graft. It can be divided and used in both upper as well as lower lids, or can be sort of, contoured to fit your defect better. And this is the sort of outcome that you can get when not only you have a very nice looking prosthetic eye, but an excellent correction in entropion along with the evisceration. And the last part is about ptosis, which is also very commonly seen in anophthalmic socket surgery. You see the series of photographs here with the patient having ptosis with prosthesis, which is then corrected with minimal amount of levator resection. So in summary, in anophthalmic socket surgery, the nomogram that we follow is we correct the volume, we correct the surface, both of these via the several modalities that I told you, then assess if the prosthesis is good or not and change it, and finally address the eyelid to give you a much better cosmetic appearance than where you start from. Just to summarize, I have spoken to you about the different techniques of evisceration and the common complications such as migration, extrusion, volume loss, peri-implant cysts, and eyelid malpositions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tarjini. That was an excellent presentation, and such wonderful results, even after OOPS and even following, evisceration surgery. Excellent. I think it's a treat to watch, actually.
It was more of a wow factor.
Yeah. Oculoplasty, that is the best part. Everything about oculoplasty is a wow factor. Yes, Tarjini. Thank you so much. Thank you. So it is my pleasure now to request the moderator of the session, Dr. Sonu Goyal, also the member scientific committee of AIOS, who's done wonderful programs with the AIOS headquarters, and everybody knows about it. especially the innovations during the COVID era. One of the best attended programs, and I would request him to give his talk on OOPS in smile surgery.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'll just try once again if the problem gets sorted out.
Yeah.
And
And this is just to inform everybody that we are being watched in this hall by over 150 people. At this point in time, this is the highest attendance in any hall.
that's again a wow.
After an oops, it's a wow.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll just like to continue with the presentation. And Ashwin, is the video running now? Ashwin, is the video running?
No, sir, it's not running right now.
We are getting our screens here, Sonu, on the
Sorry?
right. It's like a
Yes, sir.
screen which is coming on the right side here. It's not running.
There's no video, ma'am?
No.
Not running.
And then the side cut, and this is how.
No. We are sharing your speaker. This thing now, it's not there.
Yeah, I'll just off and on. I'll just try once more. If it works, it's fine.
Sure.
No video, Ashwin?
I mean, the screen is open, but we are also seeing our faces on the right side of the screen.
Here is that
But the video is not playing. It's just the screen.
I think, ma'am, I'll not like to waste. You can continue with the session. And
No, we can see your thing without the.
Let's see the
screen,
other
no?
videos, the smile videos which you were showing, Dr. Sonu. Those
I
were
think
nice.
that was the main video. 6
Okay.
minutes video. It was a.
सर, sorry
Okay,
to
then we
interrupt.
can just have a.
सर ये वीडियो जहाँ पे जिस फोल्डर में है आप वहां से प्ले कर दीजिए डायरेक्टली अगर जिस
Play
I'll have to waste time for that. Is it visible?
नो सर
You have to share screen. You've not.
Okay. So maybe I'm switching on to the next video and I'm not doing a full screen.
Even the previous video, you can just show like this only. I think.
Visible now?
No, you can show your first two videos also like this, Sonu.
Ma'am, it's not visible now also?
It is visible now, perfectly visible now. So we can play from slide number 2.
Ma'am, actually that video will,
Not play?
yeah, so that will be a long story.
I think the issue is it's a longer video and he wants to have the cursor to.
Sorry
move.
to interrupt, ladies and gentlemen. It's 12:35 right now. The show.
Okay, it's okay.
Session
It's okay. There is no session, I think, in this after this. So yeah, Sonu, this is playing. You can play this.
So I think this is a long story. I mean, I'll waste a minute of yours.
Perfectly all right.
Sure, no problem.
Audio, please. Audio.
I just wanted to skip this.
Okay.
In any case,
No, it's okay. Fine. No problem. Saima, we don't have any other session, no, in this after this.
No, not in this room.
Okay, perfect.
Less incidence of policing and private stability features with the smile. The present here, innovative method expression, which we call as life expression. It's a great tool. Then have a very strong system. So let's watch. Here we present you smile surgery using max. The patient is taken, and after talking, this is how the lenticular cut is being made.
Just increase the audio a little bit.
Side cut, and this is how the cap cut
Perfect.
takes place from inside out. And once this is done, the side cut or the main incision, which is 2.5 millimeters, how beautifully it's a very smooth dissection in these patients, and all depends upon the docking. A soft docking would always give a very smooth dissection. So I just go
under the cap, up on the left, and then very gently on the right. Very carefully, the incision is not being.
Okay, this video has stopped. So, hello.
Yeah, I think the video stopped.
I think we've lost connection from.
We lost him. Yeah, I think we lost him. But yeah,
Oh, he's there again. Yes, Sonu.
you're on mute, Dr. Sonu. Just FYI.
I think this is the biggest oop that is happening.
Oops of technology, which is happening.
Oops of technology, yes. So it'll run again. I can't help it.
It's okay.
Should I make it run again?
Yes.
It'll start from the 0.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Oh.
So, Tarjani, are you there? Tarjani, how many of these cases which you showed? I mean, I'm sure most of them were referred, like problems in evisceration, etc., are referred to you.
Ma'am, she is not there.
She's left. Okay. So I'll ask Ashwin. Ashwin, what do you like best, solving other people's oops or innovating?
I think both have their own place, but
Mhm.
but if I have to be honest, I think innovation would be a shade ahead of the rest. But I think it's also, we don't think about innovation the way that innovation is thought about. Oh, how can this person think? I think the more you practice and the more you keep doing, the innovation automatically comes in the middle of that.
So Sonu, you can continue from here. Sonu is again. Yeah, Sonu, please continue.
And then Yeah. the side cut. Sorry, ma'am, I was not able to hear you. Please.
Yeah, perfect.
Inside out. Once this is done, the side cut or the main incision, which is 2.5 millimeters. I'm sorry for all this. The biggest oop.
It's okay, fine.
It all depends on the docking. Soft docking would always give a very smooth dissection. So I just go under the cap, up on the left, and then very gently on the right. Very carefully, the incision is not being distorted. I go underneath the lenticule. Now the trick here is that I leave a small stump at a 1 clock hour, maybe at the 3 or the 9 clock hour, depending upon the eye. Then I move on the right side, do a complete dissection, go back, and then break this stump. Now this is a technique by which I will be able to hydro express the lenticule. So I go in, push in the fluid, and very gently, the moment I pressurize, the lenticule expresses. Now this technique of hydro expression of the lenticule can be a great help, which I'll be able to demonstrate in the coming video. We present an interesting case of the smile, and if you see carefully, the lenticule cut is being done. The moment the side cut starts, you see something creeping superiorly, and this is the conjunctiva bloating. I'm very careful, and the moment I feel the vacuum might lose, I release the foot pedal now, and I release the vacuum. See under the microscope, it is 98% cap cut. So I try to read on the patient, and this is how the redocking is done. And the aim is to recut the cap. Now, again, watch. The moment I'm doing the recut, there is again, the moment there is a side cut, again, I lose the vacuum. So the side cut has been there, but this has still been incomplete. So I really have to work through a very small, tight incision. I am able to do 2 separate planes here. And I am doing the cap dissection. If you see here, this is a smooth dissection here.
very carefully. I go to the right side. So yes, we have separated the cap carefully. I go now underneath, and this is the bed, and I leave a pillar here, and I do the rest of the dissection. Now the basic aim is to hydro float this lenticle because the incision is very small. I cannot use a forceps here, and the stump is then broken down here. Ocean fluid. See, even the cannula passing is difficult here. I just float, and this comes out. So this hydro expression is a great technique which works in adverse conditions, and we repeatedly practice this.
So the point brought in was that even for small, very small, sub 2 millimeter incisions, tight incisions, I think what Gaurav has propagated, this hydro expression, works wonderfully in these adverse conditions. So I'll not take much of time for the rest of the videos. I think we'll end up here. Thank you, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity, and thank you, AOS, and for the wonderful scientific feast.
So thank you so much, Dr. Sonu, and I think that was a wonderful technique, the hydro dissection of the lenticule, because at times you do tend to struggle, getting the tip of the lenticule out, and in that process, especially if you're doing your cases in the beginning, and I mean, you're just a learning surgeon, you might extend your incision to the right or to the left, because you don't realize which side the pressure is, and I think that is a very useful point on and a tip that you gave.
Thank
so, any questions for Dr. Ashwin? So, Ashwin, the question that I had for you, anything that you would want to add, Ashwin?
No, I think the point is certain things that happen in cataract surgery, especially if you have a rip of the rhexis margin, like I had showed you in my second case, or my first case, whenever you have a rip of the rhexis margin, make sure that you don't implant the intraocular lens into that direction. I mean, that's what I think the mistake that I made in that particular case was the rip was in the inferior quadrant of the bag, and I was pushing the lens exactly into that exact same angle. And that's something that I probably could have avoided to avoid this problem. And I probably would have had a good bag placement of this lens as well. I could have avoided that. But in case you do have that, try not to yank, pull, remove the intraocular lens, retain it there as it is, put a tire, do the anterior vitrectomy, and then proceed with whatever maneuver or procedure that you want to do. Is certain tips and tricks if you want to move into a little more complex, challenging case scenario. I think those are certain things that I think are imperative.
Okay, I think with this, I'll move to the last presentation, and that's OOPS and DMEC surgery. So this is DMEC in hazy media as well as OOPS and DMEC surgery, and I'll be talking to you about both. DMEC in hazy media, there are several ways of doing it. You can use an intraoperative handheld slit lamp, or you can use an intraoperative use of endoilluminator, which Dr. Susan Jacob has highlighted, and you can also do it with the help of the microscope integrated OCT or the IOCT. And this is what we published, the IOCT guided DMEC in corneas with poor visualization. I'll just show the videos of the same, and this carries both the OOPS and DMEC as well as the difficult case scenarios. Now, if you have a eye syndrome such as this, you can make out that the iris is stuck to the back of the cornea there. And then when you remove the epithelium, it gets a little more visible. And the desmetorhexis is then done so that the diseased Descemet's membrane is removed with the help of the reverse Sinskey. And again, if it's hazy, then you can't see it on the operating microscope, but you can make out on the intraoperative microscope that there are remnants present which need to be removed. Now, these are removed from the side port, and after removing this, one can then place a graft inside. This is the diseased Descemet's membrane which has been removed, and following this, one can place a graft inside the anterior chamber. And after placing the graft inside the anterior chamber, one can then, unfold it. So these are little remnants which are left, which need to be addressed, because if you leave this inside, then the graft is not going to get stuck to the back of the cornea. And this is the graft which is being placed inside. You can see that the graft is here. You can't make out where the graft is. Of course, you have to stain it with the trypan blue dye. And then subsequently, the air bubble has to be instilled so that the graft gets stuck to the back of the cornea. Then we come to a case of pseudophakic bullous keratopathy, where again, it looks hazy, but it is actually not, because the moment you remove this edematous epithelium, it will get a lot more clearer. And then again, you remove the diseased Descemet's membrane with the help of the reverse Sinskey, and then put the graft inside, which is a Descemet's membrane roll. And you have to get it into a biceps curl upwards kind of a configuration. Then you know which side is the correct side. Now, for instance, it's tightly scrolled here and you can't make out. But here, if you see, it's a biceps curl upwards kind of a configuration. And when you have that biceps curl upwards, you know that endothelial side is down and it is the stromal side which is up. After doing that, one can then instill, now this is biceps curl upwards, which is curling up like this, and then put the air bubble there and the graft gets stuck. You can't even make out where the graft is. And this is pre-op and the post-op picture, which clears up over a period of time. Now, this was a very difficult case, a TAS case, and I thought that we should do a full thickness penetrating keratoplasty. But the anterior segment OCT told us that, look at this very thick membrane which is there, and probably it will get clear if you remove the edematous epithelium, as well as remove the Descemet's, which is hazy there. So this is just to give a mark. This is again a oops moment. As it is, everything was hazy, and then I've smudged it with ink. Can barely make out what I'm doing except on the IOCT microscope. And this is the descemetorrhexis, which is being done. And this is actually post-TAS. There's some amount of inflammation also. And that is why it is looking so hazy. But just see how, as you remove this complex of membrane as well as Descemet's membrane, which has occurred post-TAS, it will slightly appear to get better. And it's a very dense fibrotic membrane. And the moment it is removed, then it does get a little better. This is air bubble. After this, we can put the graft inside, the Descemet's membrane roll inside, and then subsequently air can be injected. And notice that the thick membrane which was there has now disappeared. It is being replaced by a physiological healthy graft, which is now there inside. Again, you have to get that biceps curl upwards because again, you can't see here. So you get that biceps curl upwards. Now you see this biceps curl upwards here like this. And once it is like this, you see it on the intraopposite microscope, you know that you are in the correct side. This is the endothelial side. And look at the way like an umbrella, it just kind of unfurls and gets stuck to the back of the cornea. And in the post-operative cases, post-operatively, by 3 months, these cases, they actually become clear. Now, sometimes you do have failed grafts, failed DSEK, which have been done before. Again, these can be removed and you don't realize that, there is an adherence which is present there and one has to be careful. Otherwise, the whole root of the iris will come out with this. As soon as I realized that there was some adherence there, I just very gently try to pull the graft out and detach it. Now, this is the biceps curl upward. So we will load it in this direction only. And of course, that S is also there, which will tell you how this S should be looking at you so that you know that your endothelial side is down. Now here, look at this biceps curl upwards as well as the correct side of the S, which is looking at you, which has been put on the graft as a stamp to allow you to know which side is up. And then you put the air bubble and then it's got stuck on the AS OCT. You can't even make out, where the graft is. Now, if you don't have a intraop OCT, you can do it with the slit beam also. And just notice how these curls are upwards again. And you have to get it like this, biceps curl upwards. I think the message of my story is biceps curl upwards. Now, sometimes you can have these very bad oops movements, which you don't like to see, but I think you should so that you don't have them yourself. So this is the way that incision is, everything seems perfect. The incision is a little not in perfect order and the graft escapes out. And this is because of the inadequate docking in the graft. So this is an inadequate dock and this is an adequate dock when you do it. And again, adequate docking now we are doing, and we have reloaded the graft. Now it's completely sealing the incision, because if some gap is there, it will come out. So what is the mechanism of lenticule extraction? The mechanism of lenticule extraction is, now I've put little bit of fluid there and the graft comes out. So the immediate instinct is to push it back. Of course, it should not be done like this. It should be taken into an injector, but the immediate instinct is to push it back. And so it is important that when you have a inadequately secured main wound, you inject the BSS beyond 50% of the lenticule. If there's increased intraocular pressure, then egress of the fluid from the same wound may occur with the force, and extrusion of the graft may occur. Now let's watch this on an animation. So if I'm putting the fluid here, graft will definitely come out. So this is what has to be avoided and should not be done. The fluid should be put preferably not leaving a gap, so that there is a conduit for the graft to come out through the capillary action. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and these were, I think, my oops moments. In DMEC surgery, and intraop OCT microscope has made a lot of difference the way we do our surgery. And earlier we used to consider hazy cornea as a contraindication, but now hazy cornea is no longer a contraindication for DMEC surgery. It can be still done in a case where corneas are hazy, because it leads to less amount of graft rejection, because you're putting only the Descemet's membrane roll there. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and I think we are through with the session. And thank you everyone for being there. This session was envisaged actually because of the fact that in our own managing committee meeting, there was a request by the managing committee members that we should have all these complications put up somewhere on the AIOS website, so that if our AIOS members do get into a problem, there is a web resource there for them to refer to. And if they do fall into medical legal problems, then there is a reference for the legal issues to be taken up, so that they're not reprimanded for the same. So thank you everyone for attending this session, and we look forward to you again in the next 1.5 days. So enjoy yourself. Thank you.